Gen X retro gaming. This is where it started. The Atari 2600, Pitfall. As an older Gen X, I was 7 years old Christmas of 1980 when we got the Atari 2600. By 1982, when Pitfall came out, I was 9, and this one felt different immediately. Most Atari games were simple: one screen, shooting things, getting a score. Pitfall wasn't that. You were reacting, you were exploring. And this was an Activision game, which mattered. By then, Activision was becoming a name you trusted. If Activision made it, you were expecting smoother controls, smarter design, and something more ambitious than a quick arcade clone. The side-scrolling jungle worked perfectly with the Atari's limited hardware. Timing mattered, mistakes mattered. The 20-minute timer made every move count. Unfortunately, the game was very difficult with the floaty Atari 2600 joysticks. But don't forget, this coffee maker has 4,000 times more RAM than the Atari 2600 had. Looking back, Pitfall was one of the first games that made the Atari feel less like a toy and more like a game system. For Gen X kids, this was the quiet moment gaming leveled up. Gen X retro gaming. This is where it started. The Atari 2600, Mega Mania. As an older Gen X, I was 7 years old Christmas of 1980 when we got the Atari 2600. In 1982, Mega Mania was released when I was 9 years old, and I got the cart soon after. This was dangerous for the Atari 2600 because you never knew what you were going to get, as even the box didn't have pictures on it. This game was made by Activision and one of its first. We hadn't realized it yet, but soon would with the next games Pitfall and River Raid. Activision for the 80s and 90s would be one of the best developers by far. Consoles are computer systems. If Activision made it, you could be certain that it would be a high-quality game. The nature of the side-to-side movement in Megalomania worked well with the Atari's limited engineering and floaty joystick. This game truly used the full capability of the system with smooth, arcade-like side and vertical scrolling. But don't forget, your average smart light bulb today is thousands of times more powerful than the Atari 2600. This game is fun to play today, and I spent hours playing it as a kid in the early 80s. It was one of my most favorite Atari games. I still feel 50 years later that Mega Mania is the most underrated Atari game produced. Gen X retro gaming. This is where it started. The Atari 2600, Combat. As an older Gen X, I was 7 years old Christmas of 1980 when we got the Atari 2600. The excitement was crazy. We were going to be able to play our favorite arcade games, Asteroids, Space Invaders, and Pac-Man at home. Combat came in the box, and my 2.5-year-old brother and I immediately began the first original PvP. Unfortunately, even in 1980, it hit pretty quickly that this game was not arcade quality. It was at best clunky and the joysticks were floaty. Yet, that didn't stop us from playing it and having a good time. For any older Gen Xer, Combat is what started it all. Gen X retro gaming. This is where it started. The Atari 2600, Space Invaders. As an older Gen X, I was 7 years old Christmas of 1980 when we got the Atari 2600. Not counting pinball, Space Invaders was the first video game I remember dumping quarters into back when I was about 6 years old. And honestly, almost 50 years later, a Gen Xer still won't pass a Space Invaders cabinet without thinking about it. At 7 years old in Christmas of 1980, I got my copy of the Atari 2600 Space Invaders. Unlike some other ports, looking at you Pac-Man, Space Invaders wasn't arcade accurate, but it worked on the Atari 2600. The nature of the game's side-to-side movement worked well with the Atari's limited engineering and floaty joystick. The game felt complete and actually played smooth and very arcade-like. But don't forget, this video you are watching stores more data than 5,600 average-size Atari cartridges combined. Yet somehow, with almost nothing, Space Invaders delivered tension, pressure, and pure fun. Atari 2600 Space Invaders was absolutely worth owning. It wasn't perfect, but it felt right. And for Gen X in 1980, that was enough. Gen X retro gaming. This is where it started. The Atari 2600, Asteroids. As an older Gen X, I was 7 years old Christmas of 1980 when we got the Atari 2600. I'd spent years begging, borrowing, and stealing quarters to walk across the street to play arcade Asteroids at our local Thriftway grocery store. Even today, Gen X will walk up to Asteroids, dump quarters into it, and enjoy playing it. It's that good. At 8 years old in Christmas of 1981, I got my copy of Atari 2600 Asteroids. Unlike some other ports like Pac-Man, while Asteroids was definitely not an accurate port, it actually worked well on the 2600. Sure, we still had to deal with the clunky joystick, but the game was smooth. But don't forget, your average USB-C charger cable today has more processing power than the Atari 2600. Yes, seriously. You can see these Atari 2600 limitations in the video. Notice the asteroids only travel vertically? We played this game a lot at home. It was worth the fortune it cost us poor Gen Xers, who after years were lucky to only have a few cartridges in our collection. Unlike my Gen Z kids, who by this age had hundreds of games to play. Atari 2600 Asteroids is still a fun game to play today.